Lord, thank you that you call us, whoever we are, whatever our past is, however ordinary we may seem, and that you want to use us and transform us. Just be with us now and teach us more about what it means to follow you. In Jesus' name. Amen. I am on, aren't I? Yes, great. Welcome back, everybody. It's those of you who have been away. Many have been away on holidays. I'm not sure whether anyone got quite that view on their holidays, or indeed whether anyone had to complain about anything about their holiday. You know, I came across last few days a website about real complaints sent to Thomas Cook Holiday from holidaymakers. Here are just 3 highlights. First one, the beach was too sandy. We had to clean everything when we returned to our room. That's what I like. It took us 9 hours to fly home from Jamaica to England. It took the Americans only 3 hours to get there. This seems unfair. What about this one? When we were in Spain, there were too many Spanish people there. The receptionist spoke Spanish, the food was Spanish. No one told us that there would be so many foreigners. It's incredible, isn't it? Just what some people complain about. And it shows to me that some people just completely misunderstood what their holiday experience was all about. They were so caught up in their own little worlds and in their own personal preferences that they completely missed the point of much of it. And yet reading these made me think, I wonder whether we do that with Christianity sometimes. I wonder whether in 2017, 2,000 years after Jesus walked on this earth, we have in some ways so domesticated what Jesus said and got so caught up in our own little lives that we too have actually missed much of the point about what Jesus is calling us to. I wonder whether we've reduced Christianity to merely going to church on a Sunday and being nice and respectable. I wonder sometimes whether we've reduced it to simply following a set of rules, almost as a bit of an insurance policy that actually God blesses us and that gives us a nice life and gives us a ticket to heaven when we die. You know, I think actually what Jesus calls to is much, much more than that. And over the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at passages from the Gospel of John. Journeying with Jesus. Going back to first principles, as it were. Seeing what it means to follow Jesus and to be his disciple. And this morning we're looking at this passage from John 1 where Jesus gathers his first disciples just to see what Jesus is calling us to. If you want to grab a Bible from the sides, do. And just have the scripture out in front of us as we reflect on it today. Just to set the scene, we've just had introduced to us in John's Gospel John the Baptist. And John the Baptist has just denied himself being the Messiah, the anointed one. But he's gathered around some disciples around him and he's talked about preparing the way for Jesus. And here Jesus has just arrived on the scene and John points him out to everybody. Points him out to the crowds and says, look, the Lamb of God. It's that hint already in the Gospel that Jesus was to be that sacrificial lamb, to use the Jewish analogy, who would come to set people free from their sins and to come and lead them into abundant life and a new way of being. And we see here over the next few verses, different people follow Jesus and become his disciples. And it starts with the 2 disciples of John, Andrew and an unnamed disciple who many think actually was John himself, the gospel writer, but just keeping it quiet as to who he was. You see, they'd been following John, but as soon as Jesus was pointed out to them, they left John and they followed Jesus. And here in verse 39 of chapter 1, we see the first of Jesus' invitations, which I want to focus on this morning. See, when Jesus asked them, first of all, what do you want? They responded to Jesus with not a long list of things that actually they wanted Jesus to do for them. But they simply said with a question of their own, where are you staying? It wasn't because they wanted to know the details of Jesus' sleeping arrangements, but because they wanted to be with him. They wanted to spend time with him, to find out more about who he was, and to learn from him. And Jesus' reply was simple. He said, come. Come and you'll see. Come and see, he says. It's interesting here, isn't it? When Jesus first invites them, he didn't say, here's a set of rules, go and follow them. He didn't say, here's a set of beliefs, sign on the dotted line. He didn't say, go to church and follow a whole load of religious practices and sign yourself up to 5 church rotas. He simply invited them to come and be with him, to come and you'll see, to come and see who he was and to start their journey with him. And that, I think, is the starting point of what it means to be a disciple, to be a follower of Jesus, is to accept that invitation, first of all, to come and spend time with Jesus, to come and find out who he is. And John, in his gospel here, makes this very clear, that it's all about Jesus. So much of his gospel is crafted around the question of who is Jesus. And he covers the 7 I am sayings of Jesus, which we'll cover some of them in our sermon series. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I'm the bread of life. I'm the good shepherd. I'm the gate for the sheep. I'm the resurrection and the life. You see, John's saying it's all about Jesus and about discovering who he is for yourself and receiving his invitation to journey with him. And it's not just Jesus who says, come and see, is it? But those first disciples, when they've met Jesus for themselves, when they've had that first encounter and realised there's something special about Jesus, they go to their friends and family. Andrew gets his brother Simon, Philip finds his friend Nathaniel, and they both say to them, come and see. Come and meet Jesus for yourselves. There's something special about this person. And it's great to see that when it happens, doesn't it? And as I look around church here, I see many of you here who are here because actually friends or family have said to you, come and see. I found something. I've encountered Jesus. I've met something. Jesus has changed me. Come and see for yourselves. I think sometimes we get so afraid of evangelism, can't we? And to speaking of our friends and family, of things of faith. But here's just a great example of how simple it can be. To simply say to others, come and see. Come and see for yourself. And maybe actually some of us, that's a word for us this morning to say, who can we just give that invite to? Maybe particularly with our harvest services coming up in a couple of weeks' time, particularly with songs of praise on the Sunday. Maybe just say to someone, come and see, come and join us. Come and find out for yourselves. And we're not simply invited to come and see, I think, but to become and to be transformed. I love the way that in this passage we see Jesus later on telling Nathanael, I saw you under the fig tree before you saw me. It reminds me that Jesus knows us even before we meet him. That he calls us even though he knows our past. Even though he knows who we are, warts and all. But he still calls us. And he calls us like that little caterpillar turning into a butterfly so that he can transform us. When Andrew's brother Simon is invited to Jesus, Jesus immediately looks at him and gives him a new name, doesn't he? He says, Simon, you're going to be called Cephas from now onwards, which means Peter the rock. We talked about last week, Darren talked about names being significant, describing who we are. And it's as if Jesus here wants to give Simon Peter, right at the start of his calling, a vision of what he would become. To give him a new identity. To give him his true identity. You see, when Peter met Jesus, he was far from a solid rock-like character, wasn't he? We found that out at Holiday Club this year. In those early days, he would be impulsive, promise things he couldn't deliver, cut off a servant's ear in a fit of rage, fall asleep and disown Jesus at his biggest time of need. But Jesus knew who he was. He knew that Peter would let him down. But he still accepted him and called him. And he knew what he would become. See, becoming a follower of Jesus is about starting out on a journey to a new identity, to become all that God has called us to be, to become transformed to be more like Jesus. That's what we talked about, wasn't it, in the Rhythms of Grace. Rhythm 3, be transformed into the likeness of Christ. But not just be transformed into the likeness of Christ, because Jesus doesn't make us all clones of each other. We're called into what he has called us specifically to be. Jesus knows our past, but he doesn't let that define us. He says, come to me and I'll make you new. I want to transform you to step out into all that I have for you. And it starts by simply coming and dwelling with Jesus. But it doesn't stop at come and see and come and be transformed. For Jesus goes on to find Philip in verse 43, and he says to him those great words, follow me. And Philip left everything and followed Jesus. Follow me. It's that phrase, I think, which is at the heart of what being a disciple is all about. That's what made the difference between being simply part of the crowd and stepping out and being a disciple of Jesus. You know, all of the crowd that day, they came to investigate who Jesus was, just like the disciples did. But the crowd, if you like, came on their terms. They came often when they needed something. They came often when it was convenient to them. And mostly they were actually unchanged by the encounter. Their lives carried on much the same, with perhaps a bit of Jesus on the side whenever he was in town. But those who turned to disciples, those who chose to follow Jesus and to step out from the crowds, were very different, weren't they? They came and they stayed with Jesus. They gave up everything to journey with him, to allow him to direct them. It wasn't just another club or hobby that they had. For them, it affected their whole lives. And they were utterly transformed by the encounter. And they allowed Jesus to use them and to shape them into the people that he had called them to be. You know, I remember when I was in my late 20s, and if I'm honest, having a real crisis of faith. It was a big period of doubt for me where I just was at that crossroads where I was thinking, is this Jesus stuff all true? Or is it something I just believe because I've been brought up to believe in? And I knew at that point I had to make a decision about the way forward in my life. I can remember thinking to myself, if this Jesus thing really is true, if he really is God, the Son of God, if he really is the Messiah, if he really is all who said it to be, the way, the truth and the life, then actually it's got to affect my whole life. I've got to actually let Jesus lead me and actually take control of my whole life. If it's not true, then actually I may as well just pack up and just live life for myself. But what I can't do is just stay in the crowd. I've either got to step out and truly follow, or I may as well just go home. And I went through a time of really grappling with God, and others walked alongside me and prayed with me and talked things through with me. And later that year, I ended up going on a Tier 5 short-term mission team to Tanzania that summer. And if you like, that for me was a real come and see moment where I saw God at work and I encountered God in a way which I'd never done before, in a new way. And I knew he was calling me to step out of the crowds, to follow him wholeheartedly in my whole life for the rest of my life. And it's been an interesting journey. Sometimes it's been really difficult. And sometimes I've thought, gosh, I wish I didn't have to step out. But sometimes it's been amazing. And as I've learned to step out, I've seen God do some significant things. I've encountered God more and more deeply. And I'm still on that journey. And you know, that's what he promises Nathanael here in verse 50. Jesus says to him, you believe because I saw you under the fig tree, but you shall see greater things than that if you step out and follow me. And that's so often what happens when we decide to step out of the crowd and follow Jesus wholeheartedly in our whole lives. That when we step out, we see God do amazing things through us and with us. And our faith grows even more. It's lovely to hear from Judy earlier. And God's clearly been calling her, and she's been stepping out. She's been meeting God in a new way and just having a bigger vision of who God is because she's taken that risk to step out. You know, if we want our faith to grow, then we need to step out and to truly trust and follow Him. So what does it mean to follow Jesus? How can we actually follow Jesus? Well, I could talk for hours on this, and this is what we're going to be looking at throughout our sermon series. But I want to just give 3 very quick pointers today from my own experience, really. First thing I want to say, actually, the first thing we need to do is simply just to hang out with Jesus, as I want to describe it. That's why Jesus starts by saying, come and see. You know, we don't have the Jesus to hang around with physically like those early disciples did. But we can hang about with Jesus by reading this book, by reading the stories of Jesus, by spending time dwelling in these stories, seeing who he is, by spending time in prayer, really opening ourselves to Jesus. And reading the Bible not just to get better head knowledge, but actually with an open heart to really get to know Jesus better and be open to him transforming us and speaking to us and directing us and teaching us through these words. Maybe at the start of a new term, why don't you commit over these next few weeks to read through one of the Gospels, maybe to read through all of John's Gospel, just bit by bit. And each day ask yourself, what does this tell me about Jesus? And what's Jesus saying to me about what it means to follow him wholeheartedly? And allow him to transform you, to reconnect with Jesus again. And it's not just about hanging out with Jesus, but I think hanging out with Jesus with others. Others who will help us to follow him. I was listening to a radio interview this week of a man who had transformed himself from being a couch potato, smoking 40 cigarettes a day and drinking nearly as much, to someone who's become super fit and who's about to run his 1,000th marathon in 15 years. And the interviewer said to him, he said, how have you changed so much? And he said, one of the things I did was I got rid of all my old friends who were a bad influence on me, and I surrounded myself with people who would be a positive influence and who would spur me on. Now, I'm not saying we need to get rid of all our old friends. Actually, we need to be out there in the world with all sorts of people, but we do need to surround ourselves with people who will be a good influence to us and spur one another on. And that's why community groups are so great. And if you're not in a community group, then do speak to myself or email Val particularly, and we'll connect you up with a community group this term, a place where we can spur one another on. Secondly, I want to say something I found helpful is just to constantly keep asking, WWJD, what would Jesus do? I think when we have those difficult situations where we're not quite sure of what the right response is, I find it a really helpful thing to say, what would Jesus do if he was in my position? And asking him to give us that wisdom and then responding and acting that way, even though we may want to do completely the opposite. And thirdly, just that thing of being open to his guidance and his vision. I loved what Judy said about actually following Jesus, about saying yes to Jesus and to his plans. You see, Jesus, like Simon Peter, Jesus wants to give us a vision for who he wants us to become. He has a plan for our lives. And we're called to be open to his plan. You see, I think so often what we do is we come to Jesus and say, Jesus, here's my 10-year plan. Here it is. Will you bless it? Will you make it happen? And yet actually following Jesus, I think, is about saying, actually, I'm coming with a blank piece of paper. And I want to work out what you're calling me to, God. I want to work out what that looks like. It's about coming open-handedly and saying, Jesus, I want to seek your plan. I want to use my time, my talents, my money, my career for doing all that you've called me to. Will you guide me? Will you show me? And that's not just about being called to exotic places like Judy's been necessarily. While I'm also having a nice base in Hawaii. But I think it's being called to the ordinary places, our workplaces, our neighbourhoods, our families, our communities. Learning to follow Jesus there and to be open to that. And one of the things which is happening over the next few months, which particularly starting in 3 weeks' time, is churches together in Malvern are working with the LICC, who we've done some material before, Life in the Frontline, to put on these series of monthly training sessions on Sunday nights to help us work out what it means to be a whole lifelong disciple of Jesus. These are going to be at different locations. The first one's at MEC on Sunday the 24th of September, and we the church have signed up to this, to say, come along. We're going to come along and we're going to learn together how we as a church can be more effective at growing whole life disciples. So do come to that. Some of the sessions are for particular groups of people, like leaders and preachers, and some sessions for everybody. The first session is for everybody. Come along and join in with that. So as I close, let's just focus on some of those invitations that Jesus gives. So maybe one of these is what he wants to speak to you today. Firstly, come and see. Maybe you're not sure who Jesus is. Maybe you've particularly seen how friends or family have encountered Jesus and been changed. And maybe Jesus is saying to you today, come and see. Come and meet me. Come and find out who I am. Come and find abundant life. You know, if that's you, I'd love to give you this little book which says, Might There Be More, which just is Mark's Gospel in here, which just there's some stories of Jesus, some other things to help you. I'd love to give these out on the way back, on the way out. Do just ask for one from me. Or maybe for some of us, actually, it's a reminder again that we've been so busy serving and doing stuff that Jesus is saying, come back to me. Come and find out who I am again. Come and reconnect with me and allow me to meet you. Or maybe come and be transformed. Maybe actually we need to just ask Jesus to give us a vision of who he's created us to be. Maybe there are particular situations where we need to ask today, WWJD, what are you calling me to do, Jesus, in those situations? Or maybe that phrase, come and follow. I wonder whether, if we're honest, some of us would still just admit that actually we're really standing there in the crowd. That we're coming to Jesus on our terms when it's convenient to us. That actually we're living our lives outside of Sunday with sort of Jesus on the side, as it were. I wonder whether today Jesus is calling some of us here to step out from the crowd and to truly follow him. Maybe there's a particular calling that you've had on your heart, which God's been prompting you to do, that actually you're just a bit afraid of. But maybe God today is saying, actually, that's what I want you to step out to. Take that risky step for me, and I'll show you. Maybe for some that'll be for the first time, maybe for others, you know you've stepped out from the crowd in the past, but now you know you're back in the crowd. And Jesus is calling you again, come and step out. Come and follow me wholeheartedly again. Come and just let me show you all that I want you to be and all that I've got in store for you to join me in this amazing mission to bring the kingdom in this place. We're going to lead into communion in a second. I'm just going to ask Debbie to come up and just, for a minute or so, just to play a little tiny bit of reflective music. And I want to invite us, as we prepare for communion, just to think of those three statements. And just allow God to meet us and speak to us where we are today. And to ask God, what does it mean for me to follow you wholeheartedly?